This is a lot of information to absorb, and it is a very serious issue. So before we go on to figuring out how climate change impacts rivers in Sri Lanka, let's take a small break, right? Let's refresh our brains a bit and let's think how we can address this problem, because the solutions will have to basically be Sri Lankan driven solutions. But the problem is this: our baseline is changing. The world is changing. So if the world is changing, we need to start adopting new techniques and new ways of thinking. We need to start thinking out of the box. We've all heard the term, think out of the box. But how does it work? Okay, let's do a few of these things. Let's do an exercise, right? We're going to play a small game, okay? Now, the game is this. Okay, you see these 9 dots? Now, if I give you 60 seconds to connect all 9 of these dots, but you can only draw 4 lines, and you can't, one line has to connect to the other, so you can't lift the pencil or the pen off the paper. How do you connect all 9 of these with 4 lines? මේ අරගෙන නිකන් එක ඉරම ඉර කැලි 4කින් මෙම කනෙක්ට් වෙන්න ඕනේ. ලෝක සාකච්ඡාවක් කරනවා හරි ෂොක්. right. දැන් කී දෙනෙක් උත්තරේ ගත්තා අත උසන්න. right. මේ උත්තරේ කාටද හම්බුනේ? මේ ඉරවල් 4 ඉර කැලි 4කින් dots 9ම කවුණා. හැබැයි framework එක ඇතුලේ හිටියානම් මේකට විසඳන්න බෑ. මේ ප්‍රශ්නේ විසඳන්න ෆ්‍රේම් එකෙන් පිට යන්න ඕනේ. right? නැත්තම් මේක විසඳන්න බෑ. right. අපි තව සල්මක් ගමු. right. මෙන්න 3 plus 3 equals 3. වෙන්න බෑනේ, වැරදිනේ. මේ ඉර කැලිය වලින් එකක් එක්ක අයින් කළා නැත්නම් හොලවලා මේ ඉක්වේෂන් එක ඇකියුරේට් කරෙක්ට් කරන්න. එක ලයින් එකයි මූව් කරන්න පුළුවන් ඔයගොල්ලන්ට. තප්පර 45ක් ගමුකෝ. දැන් වෝම් අප් වෙලා ඉන්නේ පොඩ්ඩක්. ඕන ඉරි කැල්ලක් අයින් කරන්නත් පුළුවන්, මූව් කරන්නත් පුළුවන්. හැබැයි ඒකයි. right. කීදෙනෙක් උත්තර ගත්තද හරියට? right. බලමු. කවුද මේක කරේ? 3 plus 3 is Roman numeral VI. ඒ කියන්නේ 6. එතකොට අපි මේ ප්‍රශ්නේ දිහා බලන කෝණය වෙනස් කරන්න ඕනේ. ඇන්ගල් එක වෙනස් කරන්න ඕනේ. ඉංග්‍රීසි මැත්ස් වලින් නෙමෙයි, රෝමන් මැත්ස් වලින් කරොත් ප්‍රශ්නේ විසඳන්න පුළුවන්. අපි ප්‍රශ්න දිහා බලන විදිය වෙනස් කරන්න ඕනේ. වෙනින් කෝණකින් බැලුවොත් උත්තරයක් ඉදිරිපත් කරන්න වෙනවා. හරි. දැන් අපි ෆෝම් එකෙන් ඉන්නේ, ෆෝම් අප් එකෙන් ඉන්නේ. right. තව එකක් කරමු. right. දැන් මේ ෂේප් එකක් තියෙනවා. මට ඕනේ equal size පෙට්ටි 3ක් හදන්න ඕනේ. boxes 3ක් හදන්න ඕනේ. කෑලි 3යි අයින් කරන්න පුළුවන්. ඉරි කෑලි 3ක් අයින් කළා මට equal size boxes 3ක් හදලා දෙන්න. තප්පර 30ක් තියෙනවා. දැන් අපි speed round එකට යන්නේ. කොහොමද කරන්න පුළුවන්? right. කාටද උත්තරේ හම්බුනේ? අත උසන්න බන්න උත්තරේ හම්බුනේ කට්ටිය? මේකෙන් අපි මොකක්ද ඉගෙන ගන්නෙ? The solution is often in the problem. If we look at the problem properly, we will see the solution inside the problem itself. Right? හරි. තව එකම උදාහරණයක් දෙන්න. ඊට පස්සේ අපි ආයෙ වැඩ පටන් ගමු. right. මෙන්න රිඩල් එකක් තියෙනවා. A beggar's brother dies, but the man who died has no brother. හිඟන්නේගේ සහෝදරයා මැරුණා. මැරිච්ච මිනිහට සහෝදරයෙක් නැහැ. මොකද්ද මේ උත්තරේ? තප්පර 15ක් තියෙනවා දැන්. දැන් අපි ඔක්කොම ෆෝම් අප් වෙලා ඉන්නේ තප්පර 15යි. හරි. කාටද මේක විසඳන්න පුළුවන්? 100%. The beggar was a woman. එතකොට what does this teach us? ඒ කියන්නේ beggar brother dies and brother මැරුණා. හරි brother මිනිහා. හැබැයි ඉතින් beggar is a woman. But we assumed because the brother was a man that the beggar also was a man. So understanding the problem is key to solving and coming to a solution. Climate change impacts on rivers and water resources in Sri Lanka. Right? Now we have learned some new skills. We're going to look at these problems in a different way. Right? So let's understand what are the impacts on Sri Lanka, right, on our water resources. Number one, precipitation trends are becoming more unpredictable and are becoming more extreme. Yes? This we have already established. Right. Annual precipitation will fluctuate between minus 60 millimeters and plus 200 millimeters. So, step number one, we are starting to understand the problem. We are looking at the problem and understanding it, gathering more and more data. Then, we know that there's going to be increased droughts in the north and east and increased floods in the south and west. Too much water, too little water. Put them together, the answer is often in the problem. Right? This is nothing new. The Mahaveli scheme, the irrigation department have been looking at this. I think this engineer also brought out the same problem. How do we cancel out our droughts with our floods? Right? So answers are often in the problem itself. Then we have aggravated riverbank erosion due to high velocity discharge. Right? There's a lot of water. It's coming down fast. The basal flow rates are becoming shorter and shorter. So the more it rains, the more flooding you have downstream. Increased surface runoff velocity is creating erosion within the catchment basins, which causes not only siltation, but also fertility loss in our catchment basins of our rivers. So how does that affect? That leads to reduced groundwater recharge and retention capacity. When the water flows over the surface so fast, there's no time for it to sink into the ground. So the groundwater resources are becoming less. And with groundwater resources becoming less, and this fertile soil getting washed away, what happens? You basically have depletion of the vegetation cover in those areas. So this becomes a vicious cycle. Because in your catchment area, when the rain falls, it comes, it hits roots, it hits trees, it hits grass, and it slows down. There's a certain surface flow velocity. The less water there is left over, the less nutrition there is left over, there's less trees, which means the water starts coming faster and faster, which means it goes downstream faster and faster, which means it does not recharge the ground, and it causes floods downstream. But we must look at it from a different angle. If the floods are caused by the water coming too fast, then let's look at the source. Let's look at creating healthier basins, catchment basins. Let's get the vegetation in those catchment basins to become healthy and robust. Increase the groundwater resources in those areas so that more water gets absorbed into the ground, creating a healthy ecosystem rather than pushing it out and causing massive flooding downstream. So we have to start looking at this problem from a different angle. Finally, we have salination of coastal groundwater resources, which impacts human and agricultural consumption, and our hydropower generation. I think Sri Lanka generates 26 to 30% of our total power generation through hydropower. But it can rain too much, it can rain too little. This no longer becomes a reliable, dependable source of power generation then. So, what is the answer? The answer is we need to move out of our traditional framework of thinking and working. We need to coordinate and collaborate like we have never done before. Water resource management goes beyond the irrigation department. It goes beyond the forest department. It goes beyond the Mahawali Authority. It concerns all of us. We all have to work together to achieve success and results. So, it is World Rivers Day. So I think engineer covered some of the human impacts on rivers. But I will briefly touch on in terms of pollution and erosion and other human impacts on river systems. So there is, of course, an increased water demand for agriculture and cities as well as for industries, which we need to look at. We have one of the biggest risks and causes of riverbank erosion is actually you and me. Why? Because as children, I don't know about most of you guys, but you had a small fish tank. And any of us who had fish tanks, we all had one fish for sure, the scavenger. We all had a scavenger in our fish tank. And when that scavenger became big, we thought, ane maranna pau. Mogila alata dano. Problem is this, the Plectohinus species, what we call the scavenger, is one of the most invasive species in the world. They are bottom feeders, and most of the native fish in Sri Lanka are actually egg layers. So they lay their eggs at the bottom, so these guys go and they vacuum all the eggs. They are wiping out our native vegetation. Now you may be wondering, how is this affecting riverbanks? Problem is, Plectohinus, they make burrows in the bank of rivers. They nest in burrows in the riverbank. When you have 1 or 2 fish digging a gulla, it's one thing. When you have 100,000 fish digging holes in a riverbank, turning it into Swiss, next time the rains come, this riverbank gets washed away. So controlling invasive species, a biological factor, is a key essential part of maintaining our riverbanks. So this subject is far beyond just one department or institution to do this. We need to look at these issues. Solid waste pollution, right? And debris, as we saw. I mean, everything from a carelessly thrown plastic bag which falls into the drain and goes down and starts clogging up our rivers, breaking down into microplastics, creating pollution, various types of substances which come in and poison the water and things. Rivers are living ecosystems. They need to be healthy. If they're healthy, they function normally. If they're healthy, we benefit from it. When riverine health degrades, it impacts all of us. And not just aesthetically, physically. We have contamination of water systems through domestic wastewater and industrial discharge. I know that the Central Environmental Authority, CCD, MIPA, they've done wonderful work. They're tightening regulations. We are getting this problem under control, but we need to do more. Too much pollution is still happening in riverine basins. We need to tighten this. We need to enforce it. But more than anything else, we need to teach people. We need people to understand. මේ බෑග් එක විසික් කරයි කියන්නේ මගේ ප්‍රශ්නේ නෙමෙයි. මේක මට ප්‍රශ්නයක් වෙනවා. මගේ දරුවන්ටත් ප්‍රශ්නයක් වෙනවා. අධ්‍යාපනය කියන දේ අත්‍යවශ්‍යයි. So we need to address this on the one side with the carrot and the other side with the stick. Laws and regulations, but also education on how to get this done. Reclamation of groundwater recharge areas. Now, our aquifer groundwater resources are depleting. There's no secret on this. And the more they deplete, now we know more salinity and salination also comes in. So, protecting wetland areas is essential. It's not for the lovely coca and the lovely mangrove plants that are growing there. This is what will keep our children and their children being able to drink water. It's as simple as that. These resources are just as valuable to us as the oil under Saudi Arabia for them. As water resources deplete going forward, this is what our children and grandchildren depend on. Now we know there is heavy metal poisoning in our groundwater resources through over-fertilization and other chemicals in like Anuradhapura regions. These are things we need to think about and address, because these are treasures that we need to protect. Not for some fantastic reason. Just simply, if you want your grandchildren to be able to drink water, maybe we need to look at it now. So, hydrological disruptions through infrastructure and development. This I don't need to go too much into. It's just development of any kind. I think, as the engineer very correctly said, any kind of development causes environmental impacts. When you have soft ground and you build a road over it, you're compacting the earth, you're changing the hydrography of that area, which means you're changing the types of animals and plants that can grow in that area, right? And then when you disrupt a system, if the vegetation tower goes away, what happens? Hot sun starts coming down, more water starts evaporating out of it, the topsoil gets blown away, and this area becomes unsustainable. So we need to be very conscious of the interactions that we do. Deforestation of catchment basin and catchment basin degradation. Essential. Our catchment basins are where our solution lies. You saw the floods, the tsunamis, the inland tsunamis that are coming. If any of you think that an irrigation dam or this thing is going to stop that, but having river basin management, having proper river basin management and sustainability is going to reduce that risk. There is no one answer here. There has to be multiple answers that have to be implemented, multiple solutions, from catchment basin management to flood mitigation to diversion at the other end. We will go through some of these topics in a second. Now, what can we Sri Lankans do? I think a lot of the officials here are from regional and districts where you have a grave responsibility. Water resource management is in your hands, in your areas. This is not just a job. You all are protecting something very, very valuable, something the whole country depends on. So, what can we do? We need to look at focus areas for water resource management. Now, riverine erosion prevention, for sure, right? Watershed management has to be part of it. Groundwater resource management is an essential part of it. Flooding and disaster mitigation. Flooding, according to the UN, by 2030, Sri Lanka will lose $338 million per year from flood damage, right? This is money we can't afford to lose. Flooding is something that causes massive disruption to commercial activities, human health, infrastructure, food production, everywhere. This is something we need to mitigate. You can't expect a farmer to cultivate his fields and a flood comes and it goes away and then you say, too bad. It can't work that way. We need to have proactive answers. We need to be able to mitigate our flood waters and mitigate our droughts at the same time in a proper way. So, drought mitigation preparedness has to be part of our strategy. Water resource allocation. We need to make sure that the needs of farmers, the needs of cities, the needs of industry, the needs of power generation, all are reconciled with projections of how much rainfall is going to come. Our projections and meteorological forecasts have to be part of the decision-making process. This all has to work together as a unit if we are going to survive this. Key is research and development. We need far more data. To solve any problem, first step, understand the problem. We need to have data. We need to collect data at the ground level, at the scientific level, and we need to be able to analyze and develop solutions from this data. That is going to be the key to doing any solution that we have to implement. Finally, of course, is a coordinated response, as we mentioned. Now, we can have interventions at the community level, at the institutional level, and at the national level. Now, we have spent the last 10 years looking at global climate change intervention models, attempts different people have done to address various components of climate change. So let us show you some of the solutions that are relevant to riverine management, solutions that have proven successful in other countries. So, What are the community level interventions? A lot of you officers here, this is things that you can do when you go back to your areas. Tomorrow, day after. This is stuff you can start implementing. In areas where there is no fresh water available, in areas where you have fog and horizontal precipitation interception, fog interception, you can encourage them to create, out of Goni Nool, out of Lanu, you can make fog interception nets, where water is collected on hillsides and they are transported downstream to the houses and everything. This is pure, clean water that people can take. And you can provide people on mountains, rather than pumping the water up to them, generate sustainable, clean water sources for them. In areas where the forest or the watershed is degraded, where the damage has already been done, we can implement things like valley dams, gully plugs, swales, bioswales, right? We can plant food forests. These are all parts of tested and tried solutions. I'll explain a bit more. These are simple things that each of us can do. This is what a gully plug looks like. We all have seasonal water courses in our areas. Getting the local Govi Samitiya to come and install gully plugs like this. What you're doing is, you're slowing the speed of water. In Arizona, one of the hottest places on the planet, in America, a small group of people implemented a project 30 years ago. They installed 40,000 gully plugs in the middle of the desert. 30 years later, that desert is a forest. They have been able to prove that the water retention, groundwater recharge in those areas has increased 28%. They are saving 2,000 metric tons of topsoil erosion every year. The surface flow rate of water has reduced by 50%, which means the basal flow rate, you all are engineers, you understand this, the basal flow rate of water, the speed at which water reaches the flood-prone areas, has increased by 3 to 4 weeks. As a result, these areas have become thriving ecosystems, self-sustaining forests, forests that are able to attract and retain moisture, that are able to produce. And the streams that now come out of this desert never dry out. Even in the dry season, they have water. This is what we need to start implementing. These are simple solutions that each of you can implement in your areas. In the northern regions of Sri Lanka, where we have scorching sun, where we have very little ground cover vegetation, create earthen bunds like this. Look at the slope and create earthen bunds. Plant grass and anything that will grow, not big trees, anything that still grows, plant in those bunds. Next time the rain comes, a little bit more water gets caught, a little bit more water soaks into the ground, a little bit more water resources are there. The roots take nitrogen from the atmosphere and fix it into the plant and into the soil. When the plant dies, that roots rot and it becomes enrichment of the soil. You're starting to regenerate soil. At the same time, the surface gets covered with grasses and other plants, which means the hot sun doesn't evaporate the water out. Regeneration of our soil starts with water resource management. Implementing these simple solutions goes a long way. Any of you are welcome to check on the internet. There is 1,000 examples of this. People have been doing this for the last 20, 30 years and they have proven results. This is how we need to approach this. Bioswales. At the moment, our philosophy is, as soon as it rains, let's move the water out of our area as soon as possible, otherwise it will flood. We need to set new priorities. We need to make sure that as much of this water soaks into our ground before and only send out the rest. That causes less flooding downstream and more biodiversity and health upstream. This is what's called syntropic agroforestry. We are currently doing a project with, we are collaborating with the Forest Department to undertake a project to revitalize degraded forest systems. It is a key part of it. Natural forests, Sri Lanka used to be covered by forests. Most of Sri Lanka used to be covered by forests. Why is it that we have less forests today? Because of human intervention. Climate change is changing the conditions for forests, which is impacting them, which means we need positive human intervention to maintain the health of these forests. So, when you have soil that just is depleted, has no more humus layer, does not have water resources, it's no point going and planting a huge tree there. You will have to water that tree and keep fertilizing that tree. But if you plant small trees, pioneer plants, things that will start rebuilding the water table as well as start rebuilding the soil health, then stage by stage you can plant more and more productive trees on this. Larger trees, more canopy covers. These can be fruiting trees so that the communities in those areas benefit from this, not only the wildlife in those areas. So sustainable forest management is essential. And this is watershed. This is catchment area management. This is key. This is what a syntropic agroforest looks like. Everything in mix so that it produces food year round. But you know what the best part is? You don't need to put fertilizer. This fertilizes itself. It's self-sustaining. It's a natural, healthy ecosystem that we are recreating. Okay. At the institutional level, what are the impacts that we can do? Now we understand. I hope we're not going too long. The course of a river is proportionate to the velocity of the water that goes down that river. A river that flows fast will change course. We cannot change that. Those are huge forces. Some areas we can do interventions such as putting gabions and closing it. Other areas we need to recognize, we need to let the river do its thing. But we cannot put gabions and protect riverbanks all over the country. So we need to go towards natural sustainable solutions. Like utilizing bamboo for riverine protection, for riverbank protection. This is a method in the 1970s and 80s in the Mahavali system. We planted bamboo. But now our solution has become a problem. Why? Because when you plant bamboo on the riverbank, as the bamboo grows, it becomes heavy. As the weight pushes down, the soil underneath starts to shift. When the soil moves, it loosens, which means the next time strong waters go by, it starts removing that loose soil, which means you have cavitation under the bushes. Then the bushes fall into the river, and then they cause huge amount of problems downstream, blockages, etc., etc. But let's think, let's understand the problem. It is the weight of the bush that is the problem. So let us reduce the weight of the bush. Let's turn this problem into a solution. Because if we harvest bamboo, if we harvest some of this bamboo, then the weight of the bush is lightened, the roots protect the soil, and the local community has a sustainable raw material source for livelihood development. You can create bamboo wood, bamboo salt, bamboo for architecture, bamboo for hydroponic systems, and 100 other solutions. This one I love in particular. You know why? Because hydroponic systems use 70% less water. They use 50% less land area to produce the same amount of food. If you think back on the climate challenges that Sri Lanka will face, we will have less land and less water, which means our traditional agriculture has to transition towards climate smart agriculture. But it also means we can't import 10,000 shiploads of plastic from some other country to come and get all our farmers to become this. No, let plant bamboo on riverbanks. Let's get local cottage industries to utilize this harvested bamboo to create hydroponic systems for our local farmers, helping them with a national local product, so that 10,000 cottage industries develop around our country. And the best part is this: if you have a business, a small cottage industry where you are harvesting bamboo as you want to grow your business. You will go and plant more bamboo. The solution becomes self-propagating. This is what is needed, because countries like Sri Lanka, we don't have the money to attend to all our problems. We need smart solutions that propagate themselves and get the job done. Institutional level interventions, like I said, coordination between institutions is going to be absolutely key to achieve success from this. Now finally, I'll just touch very briefly on national level interventions. The accelerated Mahavali scheme and the current irrigation management plans, I think takes into account the requirement, the water requirement for agriculture and cities and industries. We think a little bit beyond this now. We need to also look at diverting massive floodwaters. We need to be able to divert the floodwaters that are going to hit our erosion-prone, heavy rainfall areas and move that water north. It can be aqueducts, rivers, canal systems, means of transporting, tapping these floodwaters at the higher reaches before they come further down and become huge problems, and then transporting that to our lakes, because our lakes are going to be our treasures. Getting these lakes ready to absorb these huge amounts of water and to store it so that our farmers can keep cultivating for 2-3 years even without rain is going to be essential. Solutions such as pumping water back into the ground, subterranean water storage. When you get floodwaters, purify it, pump it back in. The safest place to store food is in somebody's stomach. Safest place to store water is in the ground. By doing this, you're also reducing salination of groundwater. So these are techniques that have been utilized in other countries successfully. These are things that we need to start thinking of as a national solution. And like I said, we have to address solutions at the top and solutions at the bottom. So having flood diversion canals in urbanized areas to channel destructive water away from urbanized areas is also going to be a key essential part of achieving sustainability. So just in closing, would like to introduce actually who we are. We are, like I said, the AMPAC Foundation, and our not-for-profit has been created specifically for the purpose of developing a dynamic climate resilience and adaptation model for Sri Lanka. So what the DCRAM is it's a replicable national scale framework of solutions, right? And models and interventions which cover the entire spectrum of climate change. Because the reality is this, climate change is a global problem. Even if Sri Lanka becomes 100% climate resilient in 5 years, we are still going to lose. We need every country in the world to adopt climate resilient. From Uzbekistan to Peru to Mongolia to everywhere. And a lot of the developing countries like us find it difficult to do so. So what we are doing is we are developing a model, a framework of solutions and implementations that are suitable, that incorporate best practice methods from around the world that are relevant to Sri Lanka. And once we do this model and implement it, then other countries in the world can copy it. So this is the model that we have developed, where we coordinate with government institutions, international institutions, NGOs, corporate sector, international climate solutions, and undertake research and development to deliver a series of projects. And the Bamboo for Life project is part of this framework which protects riverbanks, and the Revive project is part of the framework to protect river basins and re-establish forest. So I think, thank you very much for patiently listening for a long time. I hope you have learned something and that it was informative. And ultimately, what we need to realize is this is what you are doing goes beyond just the job. Because I can guarantee you, in another 20 or 30 years, your children or your grandchildren are going to come up to you and say, how did it get this bad? What did you do? They are going to ask this because their world, you saw what their world is going to become. You think they're not going to ask you? And when that day comes, what is the answer that you're going to give? Are you going to say, we tried? Or are you going to say, no, I am one of the people who fought for your future? That is ultimately what it comes down to. Thank you very much for your time, and best of luck.